Hello, everyone. This is the Longevity Biotech Show with your host for today, Nathan Chang. So our show is basically we do Q&As with the people who are building and funding technologies that extend healthy human lifespan. And today we have the privilege of having Tyler Golato on the show. Tyler is one of the masterminds behind VitaDAO, which is a centralized organization that is attempting to fund longevity research and tokenize the resulting IP using the Ethereum blockchain. Um, Tyler is also the co-founder of Molecule.to, which is a startup that connects researchers with investors by turning IP into liquid assets. So welcome to the show, Tyler.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Yeah, it's our honor to have you here. So maybe we'll just start off. Maybe you could tell me about your background, just briefly, your bio.
Yeah, sure thing. So my background's really in biochemistry and molecular biology. When I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be a physician. I grew up in the United States, and I sort of pursued that vision head on for several years. When I was at university, I started interning in clinics, became a little bit more interested in research, and also I guess you could say became a little bit disenchanted with the way that healthcare functions in the United States. I feel personally there's a lot of perverse incentives. Physicians lack a lot of autonomy. And there's sort of a lot of things that fundamentally stand in the way of patients receiving care. And at the time when I was studying, I was really interested in oncology, became more involved in the laboratory and sort of saw that the real way to drive medicine forward was through research, particularly translational research. And then during my time working in an experimental therapeutics laboratory, I became increasingly interested in biogerontology. So again, I think looking at oncology through this lens of, we're treating many different cancers in many different ways, medicine's becoming increasingly personalized. But biogerontology really appealed to me because there was almost this idea that you could take a more reductionist approach and treat something like DNA damage by bolstering DNA repair, which in my mind had the potential, just as one example, to allow us to make inroads into, let's say, treating aging as a disease and all of the associated age-related diseases. When I finished my fellowship at the National Institute on Aging, I actually took a couple of years to explore healthcare in a very different context. I moved to South Africa, where I worked in HIV vaccine development for a period of time and sort of less on diseases of affluence, which I felt had really been a big part of my career development. And during that time, I spent a lot of time thinking about, if I stayed sort of the path of an academic scientist, I would probably end up spending a lot of time in the lab working on a single protein or a single gene for the duration of my career, and ultimately was really more interested in trying to do something to, let's say, affect the big picture or the system in some way. So about 3 years ago, through a bit of a chance meeting, I met my business partner at Molecule, Paul Kohlhaas, who had been spending a lot of time thinking about how decentralization could help to change fundamental incentives in things like drug development by shifting sort of ownership dynamics in therapeutics. And sort of the working thesis that we have is, what would healthcare look like if insulin, for example, was collectively owned by diabetics, if therapeutic intellectual property was owned by, let's say, the core stakeholders, be it researchers and patients who actually develop them. And I thought this was a really intriguing thesis. And potentially one way that you could actually begin to, let's say, initiate some sort of change in a system that is, let's say, sort of monolithic and extremely resistant to change.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. Um, I think your approach to changing things at a system levels, it sort of applies both to the science of aging, but also the system of, pharmacology or like the pharma industry. So you're thinking very systems level. I really love that. So maybe you could tell us more about what VitaDAO is and what is the problem that it's trying to solve.
Yeah, so VitaDAO's core mission is really to extend human health span and lifespan by researching, financing, and commercializing longevity therapeutics in an open, accessible, and democratic manner. And sort of, I would say that the mission is really to create a world where longevity therapeutics are collectively funded, owned, and governed by the population that creates them and stands to benefit from them. All of us as patients, everyone who ages is really a patient in this context, and really the researchers that are they're working on this. And the way that we sort of want to achieve that is by moving longevity funding and development out of single institutions and into, let's say, a decentralized organization or a decentralized structure where you can get really broad participation, not only from members of the public and enthusiasts, but really by, let's say, researchers, postdocs, you know, institutions as well who want to be part of this organization that have some skill or something valuable to add. And we believe that through these sort of structures, one of the really powerful things about decentralization is that you can bring together a large community that is collectively focused on a common goal. So what I'm particularly excited about with a structure like VitaDAO is this idea that you can, in essence, crowdsource expertise, intelligence, evaluation, due diligence, through a carefully crafted scheme of incentives that aligns all of the stakeholders, hopefully, in drug development to work towards this common goal. And what makes this structure quite unique, as opposed from, let's say, a philanthropic organization or even a VC in some contexts, is that the structure, in essence, will provide funding, typically in the range of $50,000 up to about $1 million, to researchers with preclinical stage ideas and beyond, in exchange for ownership in the intellectual property that they produce. And the owners of that structure will have the ability to really govern that and how it's developed.
Yeah, I love the idea. I love the concept. I think even more so than just lowering the entry for people to invest in longevity therapeutics. The bigger scheme is really just like getting everybody involved, right? So like I like
Absolutely.
how it's not geo-locked, right? Like you don't have to have gone to MIT, Harvard, or one of the UC
Exactly.
schools to contribute. You could be anywhere in the world, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, I really love that. So um, maybe you could walk us through where you guys are right now in terms of developing VitaDAO.
Yeah, absolutely. So the structure for VitaDAO is really a structure that we ultimately hope to replicate in different therapeutic areas over time. And what our hope is that we can build basically a proof of concept structure that shows that DAOs, as an organizational structure in general, can be applied quite broadly to fostering innovation in biopharma. And so, VitaDAO was sort of conceived about a year ago as an initial proof of concept for this framework. Longevity and biogerontology are extremely close to my heart. It's what I believe is, the sort of most important area in medicine for making a lot of progress very quickly. And so, we're probably 3 or 4 weeks away from launching the structure. But where we are, let's say, in the moment and where we've been over the past 3 months is really doing all of the work that it takes to actually sort of seed this organization and create the structure that will basically govern, at a minimum, how the first 3 months play out. So currently, from let's say an operational perspective, the DAO is divided into a number of working groups. Those working groups cover a pretty broad range of areas, ranging from legal, which deals with all of the legal aspects of the DAO, things like intellectual property filing, how the DAO will engage in contracts. The technical working groups, which is mostly focused on the actual smart contract and solidity development, the front end, how people will vote from a technical perspective. A governance working group, which is one of the most challenging and perhaps one of the most important for the, let's say, long-term success of the organization. A longevity working group, which consists of sort of the initial evaluation frameworks, a bunch of, in the longevity space, things like general operations, marketing and awareness, communication strategy. And basically we have, really just through word of mouth and sort of seeding this idea out, we've attracted a large group of people who at the moment are really contributing their time and their expertise, trying to figure out the best operational structure for the DAO to have, to allow it to both be democratic on one hand, but also efficient. And I'm a believer in decentralization. I'm a believer in DAOs, but they don't come without a huge variety of challenges, which you sort of want to do as much as possible in the beginning. When you sort of create, you seed this idea to the world, you have maybe a mission, values, an ethos. You really want to get that right, because the communication that you put out, the people that you attract initially in the early phases, ultimately, decide how this organization is going to grow, how it's going to develop, and how efficient it's going to be. So at the moment, these working groups are well underway. There's weekly meetings for each of them, quite a few. There's a lot of asynchronous communication that's happening via Discord. And it's a little bit like, herding cats, because again, it's not a company structure with employees. There's probably slightly less accountability than there would be in a lot of organizations. Everyone is more or less a volunteer at this point, but I've been really impressed by, the ability for this to sort of come together. And the thing that's impressed me the most is the caliber and type of people who have very quickly showed up and gotten their hands dirty and gotten involved. I often say that, like, the ability for this structure to succeed will entirely rest on people who are much more intelligent and have much more wherewithal than myself or some of the early people that developed this. And what's been really inspiring is just the caliber of people that have shown up and every day are sort of taking on tasks themselves and begin doing things. We sort of have this large, let's say, internal CRM tool, task manager, and people basically show up, go through a vetting process, and then all of a sudden just start taking on tasks and doing things themselves, which, if nothing else, is sort of evidence that with a good idea that people believe in, you can really, motivate a community to come together and get things done. So it's been extremely inspiring so far.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I think crypto is probably like the best example of people just spontaneously congregating together and changing the world in a way that's just had never been done before, right? So,
Totally.
yeah.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I come from, like, I mean, I'm a deeply skeptical person in general, just by nature. And I think I had a bit of like a hard-won journey into crypto and ultimately drinking the Kool-Aid, because yeah, by nature, I'm sort of skeptical of everything, skeptical of incentive schemes, skeptical of projects. And what I've learned recently, particularly over the past 2 years, is that there are a lot of people who have been in this space for quite a long time, through the hype cycles, through sort of crypto winters, that really came from this place of understanding that the power of decentralization really lies in this idea of communities and the power that communities have to create real change. And I have to say, for me, particularly in the past year, seeing how powerful these sort of decentralized organizations are, and how you can sort of crowdsource so much and achieve so much, almost in like a hive mind sort of way, has been extremely inspiring, and really has brought me to the point of believing that this is like the future of work. I mean, beyond biotech or beyond anything else, I think it's really what we're seeing is the sort of earliest days of what the future of work is going to look like.
Yes, I totally agree. And if anybody in the audience, or if Tyler, you're familiar with Balaji Srinivasan's work about, like, the crypto state, or this crypto network, right?
Totally.
Where, people no longer have to just, work with the people that they randomly happen to be born close to, or just
Yeah,
happen to be in the same city, right? It's now everybody is basically assembling in the cloud, found each other through the internet, united around a single goal, like longevity here, and yeah, and they can do so much together because of the power of the internet. And now we have incentive schemes to sort of like to facilitate even more progress with things like VitaDAO.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so maybe we can just like rewind a little bit and go from start to finish, just like how VitaDAO will, do the sort of like taking research, maybe voting on these proposals, how that's going to go through the VitaDAO system, and eventually in the end, how does it like become commercialized? Like just all these like sort of step by steps. How does it fund research and then take that research and commercialize it?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning there's a hope to sort of, to the extent that it's possible, mimic successful patterns of execution that we would see in the biotech space, with the fundamental difference being that this again is a decentralized organization, and there's obviously challenges that come with this, right? So I mean, from a user flow perspective, basically what will happen is we'll have sort of a genesis funding event where the DAO will raise a certain amount of funding. After that, basically you'll have everyone who's participated in that will be a member. Members have the ability, anyone who's a member has the ability to make proposals that also go beyond just funding decisions. They're decisions about how the DAO is governed, how the treasury is governed, how, let's say, working groups are incentivized, if they want to hire a full-time equivalent person, the ability to do that. But from an actual, let's say, project funding and evaluation standpoint, there's a few different modes that we're really looking at to begin to bring in research. And so the first one, and perhaps the most common one, will just be through sort of an open call process that is quite similar to the way that, let's say, the pharmaceutical industry often goes out to universities, engages with, for example, Pfizer might go to Harvard, and they might have, let's say, a competition or something where they are looking for a therapeutic in the context of a certain area, or they want to assemble some of the brightest minds in the translational drug discovery department. And they'll basically ask people to pitch ideas for projects in exchange for a certain amount of funding. And in exchange for that, Pfizer would own the intellectual property that results out of those projects. And this would be quite similar. So in essence, it's sort of almost like a reverse contract research agreement that allows the DAO to go out, find projects that are interesting, and create funding in exchange for that ownership. There's a lot of other ways that we're exploring that are perhaps more innovative or interesting that we can also begin to employ, which has to do with things like the creation of bounties, for example, where members decide that there is an intriguing therapeutic area that they believe is worth targeting. This could be something like mitohormesis, for example, or senolytics, and people could apply for different tracks to receive funding for a project that they're working on. The DAO could also operate much further downstream. It could actually simply out-license therapeutics that are at a certain stage and engage in co-development deals. We have a number of contract research organizations that are also joining the DAO. Arcturus being one of the first, which is a fully robotics, it's a cloud robotics laboratory based out of Oxford, one of the first of its type, first of its kind. And they'll also, what's really interesting is, and this is also something that's helped prove our thesis, but they're willing to provide preclinical development services in exchange for partial payment in tokens, which really validates some of the initial thinking around the value of these tokens and their ability to be used as an incentive. So the long-term goal is to really attract members, institutions, service providers that have the ability to collectively carry out all various aspects of the development process, ranging from the early preclinical stages probably up to the point of clinical trial. And it becomes a little bit more difficult when you're talking about getting into clinical trial. The funding amounts are typically much larger. There's obviously a number of other issues around longevity therapeutics, being that aging is not considered a disease or a targetable indication. But what we're really focusing on is this sort of, let's say, in essence, the valley of death. You're sort of academics who are working on a project that has sort of gone from being basic research to increasingly looking like it might be a commercializable product, but maybe need $250,000, something like this, in funding to do more or less the killer experiment, something that will show that this either has a high likelihood of succeeding or could, in essence, kill the project. And so part of the thinking here is, you have this area of funding that is intrinsically quite high risk, right? I mean, if you're familiar with investing in biotech, or if you understand the life cycle of a therapeutic, the risk profile for drug development is quite high, and you typically end up, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Andrew Lowe at MIT. He sort of had this theory around mega funds, but really the profile is like you're either, you end up making 0% or, multiple X. There's no like partial success in drug development, right? Drugs either fail or they make it to market. And interestingly, I think what you have at the moment are a lot of people in crypto who, became millionaires or billionaires. They want to do something meaningful with their money. They want to do something that they care about. There's a huge overlap in the longevity space. People really want to fund these sort of things. But I think what's unique about the structure is it allows you to do it in a certain way that is not, you know, not really philanthropy, but also not necessarily traditional investing either. It really has maybe a more unique risk profile than, let's say, investing as a VC or something would look like. So over the, once a project is actually funded, they have to outline specific milestones where they might need more funding. They obviously have to have a certain timeline, what their experimental plans are, with full understanding that science is not linear, and a lot of it is failure and things often don't work. What we're really encouraging is for laboratories to have a really tight working relationship with the community. And just for example, the first laboratory, which is the Shabai Knudsen Laboratory at the University of Copenhagen, they're going to be posting weekly updates of what's happening in the lab, videos. We ran a Western blot, here's what happened. And we hope to create a sense of community and engagement and ownership in these projects where even when things don't work out, which is often the case in the sciences, people feel really connected to this project, they feel connected to the people, and they want to keep pushing and keep developing it. And then so when we get to the stage of actually, let's say, having intellectual property, something promising comes out, a patent is to be filed, there's a few different ways to do that. We're still quite deep in the legal engineering around this. There's questions around, does the DAO need to, for example, create a special purpose vehicle for this in a specific jurisdiction? What are the requirements going to be there? And we're sort of exploring this with US legal counsel and European legal counsel to find the most frictionless way of doing it. And then at a certain point, there's many different options, right? The DAO can choose to license the IP if they choose to do so. They can choose to try to engage in co-development work with other institutions that might be keen to do that. But in many ways, it can only be engineered from a sort of vision and values perspective. At the end of the day, it's really up to the community that constitutes this organization and how they want to do it. And obviously with a lot of guidance and a lot of input from sort of, let's say, domain experts in different areas. So we have, for example, like a council of longevity experts that we're building that is going to give input to the public or the participants in this DAO on what they feel are best practices. But at the end of the day, it's really the decision of the community as to how they want to actually bring these to market and how they want to continue funding it or stop funding it, et cetera. So there's a huge amount to be, really to be determined and to be seen. And I look at this as like a very active experiment. I think this is why I'm attracted to crypto in a lot of ways. We hosted an AMA with Aubrey and Vitalik the other day, and one of the most interesting things that popped up for me was something that Vitalik said about, he felt that the real contribution of the sort of crypto space was creating this breeding grounds for experimentation and providing, whether it's economic or incentive design or systems design, that's the real contribution of the space to sort of human progress. And I totally agree. That's also why I'm drawn to it.
Yeah, definitely. That AMA was just amazing. Aubrey dropped some interesting bombs
Yeah,
during
no kidding.
the
Yeah, people have been reading into those a lot.
yeah, and of course Vitalik has been a great supporter of the longevity community. So that was great to see them, both of them together. Yeah, so that was a lot to take in, just like figuring out how you think the process will play out. But at the same time, this is very much an experiment, right? And
Absolutely.
the DAO is made of people, and it's just going to sort of evolve organically as we go. I
Yeah,
guess maybe. Oh yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I think the interesting challenge here is that, even as, I don't consider myself a co-founder of this organization because there's not any sort of real hierarchy within it to support that sort of claim, right? So what you have is essentially like a structure that is very flat where people need to determine a framework, ways, et cetera, to work together and do things. So I could say to you that, in 1 year's time, this is what I imagine VitaDAO will be doing, but it really comes from, it will ultimately come from the community. And the reliance that we have at the moment, or the belief that we have, let's say the conviction, is that we will be successful if the majority of members of VitaDAO are researchers, students, people who mostly buy into this structure on the basis of vision and a mission. And I think if we're successful with that component, which is really what I see that as my primary goal and my primary role is sort of maybe not evangelizing, but like advocating that this is a really interesting experiment, a really interesting journey to go on, and trying to convince people to join this, and not only join it, but help shape it and help create the way that it works. I think even in the past 4 weeks, one of the things that has made launching this quite difficult in the sort of timelines that we want to launch it in is that brilliant people join our Discord. They have ideas, they add those ideas, and routinely, my thought is like, that's probably a better way of doing this than I've considered. And so you're constantly taking in feedback from people. You're constantly, um, you know, I think iterating and improving on what the organization looks like or how it could be, but it's changing really rapidly, and I think it's also really exciting to see that progress.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm part of the Telegram groups and the Discord groups, and I get all these different messages. I see the chatter, and yeah, people are really excited about this, which is amazing, right? Like this is,
Yeah,
I see this as sort of like a rallying point for the longevity community, and also, as a bonus, also to, bringing in the crypto community as well, which is like my favorite cross collaboration ever. Okay, so. Um, I have maybe a couple more minutes before we open up for audience questions. So maybe you can let people know how they can participate, both maybe in the Genesis event, the token sale, and also if they want to get involved, like in the actual like running of the DAO and the different groups that are going on behind the scenes.
yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, the easiest way to get involved and by far the most active space that exists for communication is our Discord community. So joining the Discord and yeah, introducing yourself, meeting people there, beginning to engage in the active conversations that are happening is a great initial way to get involved. We just updated our website with the different working groups that are happening. There's basically, if you click on one of those and you believe that you have some expertise that would be valuable to contribute in the context of those working groups, you can go there, sign up. And that's, let's say, a much more active way to become involved in shaping the organization. Because again, pre-launch, it's like you have this Discord community, but no one's really a member yet other than the people who are actually joining sort of the working groups and will be incentivized through their work there to actually be a part of the structure. As a researcher, we're basically about a week away from launching a large global incentive scheme that would basically mean that if you were a researcher that felt you had something that could be added from a skills perspective, whether it's, and this could range anywhere from advocacy to education to due diligence in projects, evaluating them, helping to bring in certain projects, speaking to other professors at universities. We're basically launching an incentive scheme where you won't need to participate in the sale. We'll basically make you a member, give you a certain amount of tokens in exchange for that work. And then otherwise, the primary way that most people will become members is by participating in the actual Genesis funding event, which I can't announce the date yet just because there's a few technical moving parts that, plus or minus about a week at this point, but will be happening sometime around mid-June. And that will be through a Gnosis auction, which might sound scary and unfamiliar if you're not super deep in the Web3 space, but we'll have very detailed explainers on the front end of our website, basically a portal that directs you there and make it as easy as possible for even a layman who's not familiar with Web3 or doesn't hold any Ethereum or something like that to be able to actually contribute quite easily. But I would say the primary point of call or call to action would be for people to join our Discord community, engage with us, and potentially join the working groups.
Okay, great. So if anybody out there in the audience or listening at home on the podcast recording, if you're interested in getting involved with VitaDAO, definitely go check out the Discord group. You could probably get to the Discord group first by going to the official website. There's links there.
Yes.
And okay, great. So we're basically at the halfway point. So I'm going to open up for audience questions. So if anybody in the audience has a question, raise your hand. We'll bring you up. Just FYI, if you come up to the stage, that means you're consenting to us using your audio in the recording of this podcast and your profile photo in the video recording that we'll be uploading to YouTube. So while people are filtering in and asking questions, maybe I'll just get one quick question in before. So I'm trying to figure out what kind of projects would be best funded by VitaDAO in terms of like things that couldn't be funded through traditional like VC firms or investment, funds.
Yeah, so I think this is, I mean, I suppose there's nothing that prevents anyone from funding anything really at the end of the day. But for me, what it comes down to is just like if you look at the distribution of funds that exist, what you'll see is that there's a fairly reasonable amount of funding for things like, let's say, basic research. If I was working on a specific maybe DNA repair protein in a certain context. And there's funding that exists for startups if you're at the stage of creating an actual startup, and there's funding that exists for things that are that are quite late stage, where maybe I have an asset in phase 1 or phase 2. What we're really interested in are those projects that are sort of, maybe I have something here, maybe there's a viable pathway for a therapeutic, but I'm, let's say, 250,000 to $1 million away from being able to answer that question. I think the way to think about it would be, everyone uses the term moonshots. I don't think it should just be really moonshots, but it's really those that, let's say the risk profile is a little bit more extreme than you would see with traditional venture capital and things like that. And maybe so from a phase perspective, I would say that we're looking at things that would be mostly classified as sort of preclinical drug development stages. And beyond therapeutics, obviously also a strong interest in things like biomarkers, diagnostics, things that can help us improve our understanding of aging generally and also complement therapeutic approaches that emerge in the future.
Okay, yeah, totally. Yeah, I think another interesting avenue for funding or projects that could be funded are things that have like a longer timeline, right? Because most
Yeah,
VC funds have a very defined sort of horizon, but things like that are maybe more out there, yeah, like you said before, like the risk profile is a little uh, more extreme, perhaps.
yeah.
Yeah, I think an interesting example would be like Jean Hebert's work at Einstein College of Medicine, where they're trying to reverse brain aging by replacing like neural tissue, and that
Yes,
stuff
I
is
was
like,
looking at that. That's absolutely incredible. I mean, so these are like the dream sort of projects that that we would want to fund, for example. But obviously, it goes both ways, right? Like, I mean, there are, I'm sure, academics who would be, who maybe are a bit conservative in their thinking around how they would want to get funding, or maybe that for us, it's also, we need to win people over and make people believe that this is, let's say, a viable funding source and something they would want to engage in. And for me, I think that will become very clear once we've done this 3 or 4 times quite successfully with the first initial projects. And then my hope is that really people begin to come to us with projects exactly like that, But in the beginning, I think we'll have to go out and really advocate for it.
yes, I definitely agree because in some sense you want to get some early wins because if you put all your eggs in one basket in like a non-diversified approach, it's
Totally.
very difficult to survive as a DAO, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have some people on the stage. Let's go with Lawrence first. So, Lawrence, what's your question?
Ah, I wish you actually went with Aaron first because Aaron is my good friend here who is actually a moderator of the Reddit r/longevity, which has about 100,000 posts. And when Tyler said 100,000, sorry, members almost, and when Tyler said we will win if the majority of people are these kinds of people, I think the kinds of people on that Reddit are perfect. Of course,
Absolutely.
they're probably a lot more students than major researchers. Of course, I mean you're not going to have 100,000 people. You're only going to have a few researchers. But yeah, we should definitely try to get those kinds of people on board. And what I wanted to ask Tyler, so I will let Aaron speak after, but I also wanted to ask Tyler if he can explain a bit more about how the people here that think, hey, look, I think I could help with this or that, um, a bit more than just the Discord. I talked to Tyler and I learned how to actually help, but it was a bit hard to actually um, get to the point where I can contribute, even if it's just a small thing. Maybe I have this I I have this friend who's running a lab, and I would like to propose them for funding, or I have I don't know, another friend who's a crypto millionaire, and he's on board the mission, and he would like to invest or stuff like that. Just
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I have to be completely transparent with you. It's been pretty difficult. We've had, several hundred applications for people to come in, join working groups, get involved and help, and we're struggling a little bit to keep up. So I have to say we've been a bit slow in actually managing to onboard people quickly enough. Part of this is because currently we're also very deep in things like the smart contract development, organizational design, and I think every person who joins really deserves a fair onboarding. This is an extremely important part of building communities and creating buy-in. So, I mean, the best way really for people who are very serious about getting deeply involved is to really do what you did, Lawrence. I mean, you joined the Discord and you got in contact with me personally. It would be the same for any of the other core team members or working group members. If you speak to someone directly and really show initiative and motivation, I think there's a lot of ways to, let's say, not sidestep the application process, but just have things expedited a bit. We also receive, I mean, everyone's extremely well-intentioned, but you also have people who are submitting applications that maybe it's not exactly clear what they could do to help at this stage, in the pre-launch stage specifically. And so it's often difficult to say, we want everyone to be able to get involved and to help, but just because it's still pre-launch, it's a little bit difficult at the moment with everything going on. The best way is definitely, I mean, if you do in our Discord, you'll see me in there. The best way is probably just to reach out to me directly, or Paul or Theo or any of the other people that you see as sort of the Vita service team. Yeah, and we could get people sort of involved very quickly. But otherwise, for people who do fill out the form and sort of maybe find themselves waiting for 1, 2, 3 weeks, it's worth knowing that we will get back to you. It's just been a little bit of a slow process because there was, I think, a lot of interest simultaneously.
Okay, great. Let's go to our next question. Does that answer your
yes.
question, Lawrence?
No, just wanted to offer, like, if Tyler, if you need help onboarding people, I can help with that as well, to kind of free you up a bit, so people can message me as well, and I can try to help them a bit more. And also, Aaron, sorry to put you on the spot here. I don't know if that's what you wanted to ask, but yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, cool. Aaron,
Sure. Um, have you, Tyler, have you seen a DAO work to like be successful
In any context or in biotechnology
in any
specifically?
context? Any
Yeah,
context.
absolutely. I mean, so if you look at, I mean, there's many different examples. I think the most prominent ones would be sort of DAOs that, I mean, again, I guess it depends on how you define success, but many of the DAOs that exist at the moment basically do sort of decentralized investment or decentralized VCs. I think a lot of them have been extremely successful, at least in a, let's say, looking from a like ROI standpoint, things like that. If you look at DAOs like Flamingo or the Lao, for example, which operate to create, let's say, I mean, again, very different use cases. The Lao is funding, I think, a lot of development around projects and dApps in the Ethereum space. Flamingo is sort of an NFT investment vehicle. You have communities like Rloop, which are basically, it's like a sort of semi-private engineering consortium, which has been very successful in the context of the work that it's doing with its members. Gitcoin just launched. I think they're going to be not proven yet, but extremely successful in terms of their ability to leverage a large community of developers. This is the other area where I think you see a lot of success with DAOs, sort of decentralized development communities that do different things, and maybe have things like bounties that are created, which I think is also a really cool way of almost engaging in like freelance work as a developer. Where I would say that we haven't seen, there's also the the DAO, which was a catastrophic failure, and I think really haunts a lot of the thinking around the DAO space. But I think that's one of the only examples of more or less spectacular failures. And the space is extremely young. The DAO tooling, DAO framework that have emerged in the past 2 years are extremely powerful. Things like Molecule.to, Colony. You have you basically had tooling, let's say 2 years ago, that was much less sophisticated in terms of your ability from a technical perspective to actually run a DAO efficiently. So, it would be like saying, it's sort of like saying in like, the first days of the internet, like, have you seen a website that really gets a lot of traffic or has an amazing business model or like has been successful from a revenue perspective? Probably not in a hugely spectacular way yet, but I think it's just because the space is in its infancy.
Right. So I believe that DAOs can be very successful at aggregating wealth. But I'm talking about like, has a DAO actually changed something? Like there used to be the world was one way, and now this DAO came along, and then something got invented, or something. The signal quality. It
Oh,
actually did some kind of accomplishment. Not just, hey, we've got a bunch of users, or hey, we got a bunch of money.
I would say the DAOs that exist to focus on development. I mean, again, maybe not in a huge world-changing sort of way, but essentially, I mean, in terms of like, yeah, I mean, for example, in the Ethereum ecosystem in general, like the approaches to let's say decentralized development, Solidity development, I think DAOs are certainly changing the way we work. I think that's a pretty big accomplishment. But in terms of like, yeah, maybe inventing something really meaningful or beyond sort of decentralized finance and beyond maybe development in the context of the blockchain ecosystem, which is the primary place in which DAOs have really been explored, right? Overwhelmingly, DAOs were utilized to take a decentralized community of people who wanted to do something or wanted to engage in something in the blockchain space, whether that be developing an application for Ethereum or pooling resources to do something or sharing ideas. Beyond that, they haven't really been explored so much. I mean, and I think it's because they're quite new. So, I mean, maybe the easiest way to answer your question would probably be maybe not in the way that you're speaking of in terms of like the world being a fundamentally different place. I would argue that blockchain technology and decentralized finance probably has changed a lot of people's lives, and maybe the world
Oh yeah, it's
the
changed
world
people.
for the world forever in that context, but maybe not in the ways that I would feel are most meaningful or something. I don't think there's been a tremendous scientific advancement, but there's people working on things like Research Hub, for example, and things like coming up with new systems to engage in peer review and new systems to create reputation in the sciences. There's people exploring use cases in the context of DAOs, but they're extremely early. I would say the one that I probably find maybe the most interesting is Research Hub, and I would suggest for those that care about the sciences or care about things like wanting to change a system that's based on impact factor publishing, how we collaborate, to check out Research Hub, which are doing amazing work. Hasn't changed the world yet, but I'm convinced it will.
Okay, so short answer would be no then. Okay.
Yeah,
Um, all right. Let's see here.
but it's sort
Is
of
there
like
a
saying, I mean, just to play the devil's advocate, like, have you seen a drug that has slowed down the aging process dramatically in humans? You know what I mean? It's
no,
like, no, yeah,
right?
exactly, but it's still worth going for.
Yeah. Okay. Um, is there a reason why crypto has to be involved with a decentralized network?
No.
Okay. All right. That's it. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, very very succinct answer, Tyler.
I mean, but yeah, so I mean, you could have, I mean, crypto, I think, in the context of a private blockchain, for example, that is inherently not decentralized. It's a bit of I mean, so there's enterprise blockchains, for example, that are
No,
private.
well, I meant, so I like the decentralized nature of it. Uh, I'm wondering why crypto has to be from your perspective.
Sorry, you broke up on the end there. Could you say that one more time?
Yeah, it's poor signal over here. I like the decentralized nature of it. I'm wondering why crypto has to be involved from your,
Oh, yeah,
why do you
no,
think it's crypto?
absolutely. So, I mean, that's a great question. It really, for me, has to do with creating a system that is permissionless, trustless, and doesn't have an intrinsic hierarchy. So maybe a better question would be, how would you mediate this without, let's say, smart contracts in a trustless way where there weren't hierarchies? The thing that actually makes this system, let's say, function without the need for a centralized organization is the fact that you have a technology that actually allows functions to be executed based on voting without someone actually mediating those decisions. So meaning that if token holders, let's say, vote in a certain way, they stake their tokens in a contract, that contract is linked to a decision, maybe to deploy funds, and there's no one that can basically step in and say, never mind, or actually no, you're putting your trust in the tech stack that you're creating. And so far, in terms of those tech stacks, I mean, in my opinion, the Ethereum blockchain and the development of smart contracts is the most technically advanced, proven, and built upon mechanism in order to achieve that from a technology perspective. You could probably try to create something yourself that did this with software that didn't involve crypto, and maybe you would succeed. But what we have are, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people creating this infrastructure. It's pretty well battle tested, and it's well suited for these things. And then the other thing that allows you to engage in using that same tech stack is incentives, which is basically the creation of a token that can incentivize certain decision making. And so how else would you, for example, incentivize it in this context? Maybe you would pay people with fiat currency or something, then you would probably need, it begins to need additional centralized elements, an accountant, probably a treasury that's governed by somebody. So I mean, the real answer is just because it's the technology that is most well suited for the use case, and I think it would actually be much more difficult to engineer the structure without crypto. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. I think Aaron's just
My
stepped back
bad.
right in. Okay.
I switched over to the wireless network over here, so now hopefully the signal's better.
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Great. Great. Okay.
Um,
We'll just
okay.
move on to the next question. Daniel, what's your question? Oh, so maybe Daniel, you can introduce yourself.
Hi Tyler, really exciting. I'm Daniel. I'm from Shift Bioscience, so we're just a small startup working in the longevity space. I won't go into all the details. I think the most exciting thing about this is that you've got the mission on the one hand, but you've got a blank slate on the structure, and it's not just a blank slate for one person with a lot of money. It's a blank slate for everybody. So what I wanted to ask, you were talking about, it's an experiment, right? That's the excitement. You've got a blank slate and you've got the experiment. How do you manage, say there's three ideas about how you're going to move forwards. Can you run a couple of those ideas in parallel? Or are you going to try one at a time? It's almost like experimental workflows. How are you going to sort of evolve as you move forwards? Because that's sort of the excitement for me, what this might become.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, it's a question of scale for us. There's a certain, we aren't sure how successful we're going to be in the initial fundraise event. We have certain targets and create scenarios and modeling based on certain targets that we might reach. For example, if we can fund 5 projects versus 50 projects, I think the risk that you might take with those early projects or the sort of things that you would look for are quite different depending on the resources that you have, which I think is true for any organization. At the end of the day, it's still a community decision, meaning that anyone can really submit proposals, people can critique those proposals, experts can weigh in on the nature of those proposals and give feedback. And if we raised X amount of money and everyone collectively decided that, hey, we think it's a great idea to, I don't know, double down on funding a metformin trial or something, then that's something that the community could decide to do. But my vision, and I think a lot of the people who are, let's say, the earlier part of the organization is to drive this in a direction that is somewhat balanced and a bit diversified initially from a risk portfolio perspective. I think we, again, want to focus on the sort of moonshots and the things that are maybe a bit out of reach for VCs or maybe too risky for VCs and maybe not the types of things that the NIH would fund, for example, and go after, people who have a certain vision, also a certain mission and values alignment in terms of, people who are excited about the nature of this experiment that we're conducting, who would want to engage with the community, get feedback, work in a slightly more open way. That's really what we're personally looking for. Because if nothing else, if this experiment fails, what I would like to walk away with it, having done, is funded some incredible work, brought a bunch of bright minds together, created ideas, shared value, and I'm sure that even if the structure failed itself, something amazing would be born out of that pre-existing community. And that's essentially where my thinking is at, and why we sort of are doing this.
And Tyler, just really quick follow up. How long has the experiment got to run? Yeah, so like, what's your runway to get it right? Because it'd be good to have a bit longer runway just to have a few shots at getting it right.
Well, I mean, again, it's there's an initial token distribution where I'm not sure if I could disclose this yet, but I think it's okay to say the overwhelming majority of the tokens will not be issued at launch. They'll be kept within the DAO treasury. And the DAO has the ability to issue these tokens in the future. It has the ability to do follow-on fundraises, but obviously its ability to be successful with that will be defined on how successful it is initially. And so what we're trying to do at a minimum from an execution perspective is be 100% sure that we can write at least 5 $250,000 tickets with enough sort of operational runway to, at a minimum, survive for 5 to 8 years. But that would be extremely conservative. This is what I would imagine would be almost like worst case scenario in essence in terms of a, let's say, longevity perspective for the organization. What we're really hoping is, and what I think is possible with the way that the token distribution is going to work, is that the vehicle should have the ability to run for decades, if not longer, and hopefully eventually come to a sustainable mechanism that allows its indefinite survival.
Thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.
Great. So Tyler's essentially aiming for DAO immortality, I guess.
Yeah, that's the long-term goal. Yes.
Excellent. Okay, very fitting. Next question, Laura. Do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Nathan, Tyler. Thank you for having me. Um, I'm a longevity advocate, but I'm more interested in the bringing longevity to the general public to make it a customer experience. So my question comes with a caveat that I'm obviously a longevity enthusiast and also a crypto enthusiast. However, we are going into what looks like a winter of crypto again, and the market might be going bearish rather than what had been happening the last 3 months. I want to know, how do we make longevity not go the path of crypto? Because even though I love crypto, there's something very off-putting with the crypto maximalists. It's mainly men 25 to 35. And I find this in the longevity space, everybody like high-fiving each other and like all their cool projects. How do we actually make longevity? And I'm not a crazy feminist, or I don't go screaming inclusivity in any place, but I'm interested in making longevity interesting for people, so that literally the 50-year-old housewife wants it. You spoke about community earlier in the conversation. How do we make this a community, something that people are attracted to rather than repelled from, like crypto is in a way?
This is an amazing question and something that I think, we struggle with a lot. One problem that we're having in the organization off the bat, and I could speak freely about this because I think it is a problem, and it's extremely important to me that we begin to go a different way, is a diversity problem. I think you do tend to get demographics in both crypto and longevity that in many cases skew, like you said, 25 to 35 white male. It's a problem. I'm also a person who, just to be clear, a lot of my aversion to crypto in the sort of early days came from, participating in or watching sort of the early communities that were created in the space. A lot of, I think what they call in DeFi, like degen communities, a lot of terrible, a culture that I don't think a lot of people should be proud of. And to be quite frank, when we were initially conceptualizing this vehicle, one of the things that kept me up at night, or where I had a lot of fear about doing this, was this idea that we would have, a professor, an academic that I respect tremendously next to like Moon Boy 420 saying "when moon," you know what I mean? That's like a situation that no one wants to create, especially not us. But it's a real part of this culture that exists. And not to, I don't want to trash crypto culture. There's a lot of amazing things happening as well, amazing communities, people that really believe in the space, the promise of the space. But yeah, it can be difficult. It can be exclusive. So yeah, I mean, your question is a good one. I don't know if I have, the perfect answer to it. I mean, from an advocacy perspective, what I would love to do is, begin to attract more women, more people of color, more people from different economic backgrounds. But obviously, there's a number of barriers from an opportunity standpoint, from a circumstantial standpoint, that make this difficult. Yeah, and it's a problem, and it's a problem for a lot of organizations. That doesn't excuse it, but it's something that I think the community needs to be extremely mindful of. And one of the things I hope to do is to create certain fellowship programs, certain incentives, and go out rather mindfully trying to seek people from diverse backgrounds and diverse communities. Regarding your question about the crypto winter and we're obviously in these hype cycles. If you've been in the space for a while, this is nothing new. I mean, yeah, crypto goes in cycles. There's hype that occurs. A lot of the people who are in for the hype cycle fade away as soon as the market turns down. But there's if you've been in the space since 2013 or 2014, I think you'll see that there's a lot of people that persist and keep building. And I think at the point where we're at now in terms of adoption, like crypto is here to stay. I hope the demographics of the community changes over time, but I certainly don't think that Bitcoin's going to go to zero and all of a sudden everything evaporates. Like I think what you'll see is, we'll get out of these sort of hyperinflated cycles. Things will slowly stabilize over time, and all of these things that we think are quite fringy will become mainstream technological staples that power a lot of our world. But I couldn't agree with you more about the problem that we have with diversity and inclusivity, which is something that we've been speaking a lot about internally and something that needs to be addressed, but yeah, is a challenge. Sorry, I'm not. Did that answer?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I mean, I love that you thought about it, and I think it's just something that I like to bring up a lot in terms of getting people involved, the general public, to get them excited, because I do believe that longevity is really the best way. I know that a lot of people in the longevity space do want to. The whole thing is anti-aging and reverse aging and end aging. I'll just be happy if I can die without degenerative diseases.
Exactly. I
You
mean,
know what I mean?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, my interest in longevity really came from this idea of health span extension and not wanting the last 7 years of my life to be this precipitous and painful decline where, in a system that just does everything in its power to keep you alive in the face of a huge amount of suffering. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. The transhumanist arguments are exciting and fascinating and intellectually engaging, but for me, longevity is a slightly different approach to medicine that has the potential to extend, health span or healthy lifespan, and I think that's why it's a mission,
Well,
worth.
congrats on the DAO, and I hope I'm part of both groups. I don't know if I can say much, but I'll be
No,
hopefully I can participate actively as well at some point.
looking forward. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for your question, Laura. So we're just about at the hour, so maybe we'll just wrap it up and maybe just go over some of the things that Tyler has talked about. So first and foremost, if you want to get involved in VitaDAO, definitely go to their website and join the Discord group. So that's the easiest way to sort of get connected with the community. If you have something that's more urgent that you want to propose or kind of work on, you can message Tyler directly on Discord. And the other thing would be the token sale. is going to be coming up sometime in the middle of June. So watch out for that. And then the other things, I guess, would be anybody who knows a researcher wants to submit proposals. If you know some scientists who are working in labs and they have some sort of idea that they want to bring that needs funding and working on like longevity, health span extension, definitely try and connect them to the VitaDAO system and the community here. So is there anything else, Tyler, that you want to say to the people listening in the audience or at home on podcasts?
No, not necessarily. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here, and yeah, I really appreciate the platform that you've created and the advocacy that you do in general for longevity and giving people voices. So yeah, keep at it, and thanks so much for thinking of us and giving us a platform.
No, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been an amazing conversation.
Awesome.
Okay, great. So I guess we're going to end it here. Next week, we're going to have Marina Madrid from Celino. They're a AI robotics and lasers stem cell editing company. So that's going to be definitely
Incredible.
an interesting one to check out for. And that will be at our regular time at 4 p.m. Eastern next Thursday. So with that, I just like to thank Tyler again. It's been a great conversation, and I'm really excited about VitaDAO. And yeah, so we'll stay tuned for whatever is going to happen on your end.
Thanks so much. Cheers, everyone.
All right, thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.